How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Black Metal Rebellion. I'm your local non-binary Canadian metalhead, host of this channel, Jesse Morgan, aka Slammerella. And today we have a review to do, this time on the band that I told you I was going to be reviewing, and that is Brand of Sacrifice with their latest release from March 5th, 2021, and that is their second album called Lifeblood. I already showed this off in my previous collection update, but here it is again really quickly. And here's the album cover here for the rest of this video. So, if you don't know who Brand of Sacrifice are, they are a brutal death metal / brutal deathcore band from Toronto, Ontario, Canada that started in 2017. I'm not exactly sure when they officially started because I can't really find a concrete startup date. They're not on the Metal Encyclopedia. I believe they're on Spirit of Metal, but I'm not sure how well that's updated or anything. So I'm just going to say they started in 2017. If you're from Brand of Sacrifice and you weren't started in that time and you started earlier or later, please let me know in the comments section below, as well as give any links to your project that I don't put in the description box. And of course, check the description box if you're looking for their Bandcamp or Facebook or YouTube links. Their other releases prior to Lifeblood, their second album, was an EP from 2018 called The Interstice, which I hopefully pronounced properly this time, and a full-length album, being their debut full-length album, called God Hand from 2019 here. Both were on Unique Leader Records. Brand of Sacrifice are now on their own again, so it's cool to see an independent band being able to support themselves in full without the help of a label. It's always cool when a band gets big enough to be able to do it on their own and not have to rely on label support or the notoriety of other bands on that label to get them some new ears. So, speaking of Brand of Sacrifice, the band members are as follows: Kyle Anderson on vocals, Michael Valerie on guitar, Liam Beeson on guitar, Dallas Bricker on bass, and James Norrell on drums. Alright, let's get into how the vocals were. They were high in the mix, well balanced in the EQ. They had a very strong, commanding presence throughout and were performed very well. Some of the styles that you could hear in this album are these high-pitched, shrill-type screams. I'm not sure if the proper term for them are called fry screams. I'm not really huge on the uptake in the deathcore scene and that kind of stuff, so correct me if I'm wrong if that style isn't fry. There is also a main voice throughout this album and this band, and they are these kind of low, airy growls, similar to what you'd find on Whitechapel for the most part. I feel like Phil Bozeman definitely was inspired for the vocalist, or at least the main vocals that go on in this album, and as such there's a few breeze or pig squeals in this, and what I believe are known as tunnel throats. Again, not huge on the terminology in a lot of deathcore that's happening these days, but I feel like there's some tunnel throat type of techniques going on in this album. And there's some interesting stuff going on as well. There's some chanting and some female choir type action going on, which is kind of cool and very haunting at times. You don't really expect it, and I mean in the coolest possible way, because it just kind of adds to it. It's like more toppings to that brutal Sunday that you're enjoying. And of course there is a good supply of blech in it as well. So if you like those vocal nuances that happen sometimes in brutal bands, you'll definitely find them in this project as well. So needless to say, there are quite a few variety of different vocal styles to be aware of in this project. Cool that they have that many tricks up their sleeve vocal-wise. Alright, now let's talk about the guitars, which also do not suffer in the variety department. But let's talk about the EQ first. Done really well. They're about mid to high in the mix, just under the vocals. They are performed really well and consistently. As for the styles that you could expect in the guitaring, there's going to be some palm-muted, chuggy gent riffs for sure. There's going to be some drop-tuned power chords for the main riffs of the songs. There are also a couple super down-tempo breakdowns, which I feel like is a more mid to modern style of deathcore breakdown. There's also some pretty fascinating sweeps that go on, not too long or overly complicated and technical. They happen pretty quick and they're there and then they're gone again, but they add to the strong structure and variety of what's all going on. And speaking of variety and spice going on with the guitars, there's also some pinch harmonic effects, as well as the odd kind of like whammy bar octave down tuned thing going on every now and then. They just like, they hit the chord and they're like, and they just like drop it. Really, really nice, very grimy sounding. I definitely enjoyed when those happened. All right, let's move on to the bass, where unfortunately I couldn't really pick it out. I listened and I listened and I listened and I really couldn't find the difference between the drop tuned guitars and what could have possibly been a bass guitar. It was really low in the mix, just buried under everything else that was going on. Needless to say, I couldn't make out any kind of specific moments, or there's no solos where it was obviously the bass shining through. And with that being said, there is no discernible highlights or additives with the bass, unfortunately. So let's move on to the drums. The drums were about mid to high in the mix, just under the guitars. I feel like the drummer, James Norrell, did a great job overall. As expected, there's a lot of blast beats and a lot of double kicks, and a pretty decent technical amount of polyrhythms as well in there. The fills were present, and there is some insanely fast drum rolls and transitions. You're gonna have to be chugging at least a few monsters back to back to keep up with the energy required for these drums. So good job, James. Holy crap, I'm sweating just thinking about the effort you had to put into this album. All right, so let's move on to a few of my favorite tracks. All right, starting off with the last track on this album, track number 12, and that is Lifeblood. It just had the coolest, grooviest riffs of the whole album. Had this sick as fuck beginning intro thing. It's basically this snare and then the singer going blech with a breakdown just starting into the song. It was pretty amusing and very entertaining for sure. I enjoyed that quite a bit. And then the track number 9, which is Vengeance, had a lot of all of the guitar and vocal elements that they're doing for this album in this track. Then they had this Chester Bennington sort of sounding vocal guest, which is, I'm assuming, Jamie Graham of Heart of a Coward and Silosis. Again, I assume he's the one that's doing the Chester Bennington sort of sounding vocals. I enjoyed that. There's a bit of choir in there too, I believe. But yeah, Vengeance was definitely one that stood out in my opinion. And then there was Prophecy of the Falcon. This had another guest vocalist, and that was Frankie Palmer of Emure. And I really enjoyed the line that happened throughout the song. It was a sweet main line. It's just, I am the chosen one, over and over again, here and there. Definitely made you feel like a badass if you're listening to it on a walk or heading around town on your own with the system blaring in your headphones. So yeah, this song was definitely a staple amongst the tracks in this album. There's also some pretty decent epic breakdowns in Prophecy of the Falcon. Some cool sweeps that I mentioned happened throughout. Of course, that female-fronted choir section popped in here and there. And the electronic synth effects made it pretty atmospheric as well. So a lot of elements coming to play in track number 9. And I want to just say a honorable mention track would have to be Mortal Vessel. It's track this track here, I forget which number it was, but yeah, Mortal Vessel also had a pretty groovy riff in it and it had some pretty decent breakdowns, etc., etc. So those 4 songs were probably the best on this album, but a lot of the songs on here were pretty brutal and menacing regardless. So let's talk about my overall thoughts for this album. I feel like they are at points similar to old school Whitechapel and Chelsea Grin and that kind of era, sort of MySpace deathcore, but add in that brutal death metal element, add in the female choir, add in these synth effects and sweeps, and of course they're probably tuned lower than any of the old MySpace deathcore bands. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the local band that are kind of broken up now, but there's a band called This Is Death Valley from here in Oshawa, Ontario. If you know them, think of them but on crack, or like the Super Saiyan mode of This Is Death Valley, and you kind of got the feel of what you're in for when it comes to Brand of Sacrifice. Quite simply put, these guys are one of the heaviest, most intense bands in their respective genre in Canada at the moment. Brand of Sacrifice are the musical equivalent of a train combined with a tank made of vibranium plowing through the busiest city on Earth and then detonating 100 proton packs in the center of it, releasing chaos and demons in every direction for miles. And then lastly, I think the inclusion of a female choir and the synth keyboard effects make for a haunting and atmospheric experience on top of all of the brutality as well. You definitely want to keep an eye out for anything the Brand of Sacrifice are doing in the future. But before we end this review, as always, I like to give my thoughts on some improvements or weaknesses that I spotted in the release. So let's talk about those. The lack of bass shining through meant there is no moments of definity for the bass sound, and that was kind of unfortunate. However, with all of the down-tunedness that's going on with the guitars and all the lowness of the kick pedals and the vocals, just everything being tuned down and low on the note scale in general, I feel like maybe that's why the bass got left out and didn't really have a moment to shine, with everything just being piled on top of it. So maybe in the future releases, maybe find a moment where the guitars can just cut out and let the bass do like a little, I don't know, 14-15 second melody or riff, and then cut back in. Even if you want to start a song off with the bass so you can tell that's the bass, and then cut in with the rest of the guitars on top of it to make it extra chuggy and heavy. I just want to hear what the bassist is doing, especially if you actually have a live bassist in the band. Secondly, those hooks and groovy riffs that happened in Lifeblood and Mortal Vessel, give me more of those. If anyone on this channel knows me, you know I love those chuggy riffs that come with Guttural Slug or a Cranius or Gut Wrecked Me, etc. Those just kind of like things that just get you bouncing in your seat and gets the riff stuck in your head for the rest of the month. Those kind of things are really, really cool. I enjoy that amongst all the technicality and brutality. And then the last thing I'm going to say is some of the songs kind of got, as I say, samey. You kind of can't really tell one song to the next which separated which. There's a general overarching sound with this album, at least. I'm going to have to go back and check the other releases, of course, being God Hand and the Intersice, to see if this happens in those releases as well. But I find for this album, they definitely have a very specific sound and structure they're going for. So maybe in the future, add some more variation and some very obvious things that make each song specifically that song and memorable. That would be cool. I just feel like if you listen to this whole album without looking at the song titles or when the breaks happen, you wouldn't be able to tell which song's which at times. And that's about it. But with all that being said, I'm still going to give Brand of Sacrifice's Lifeblood a solid 8.5 out of 10. Highly recommend this if you're into the brutal stuff, and if you have an open mind for brutal death metal and deathcore kind of colliding together to make something pretty intense. So yeah, I'm Jesse Morgan, and I would buy this album. Thanks again to James Forshawn, the guitarist and semi-lyric writer of Humanectomy for going out of their way to give me a copy of this from the show they saw with Thy Art is Murder. Again, super jealous you got to go see that. I'm dying to go see another show, either locally or out of town. Such good memories can be had from spending time with fellow metalheads, having a couple of beers, and just, you know, annihilating each other in the pit. Please no roundhouses though. I already have enough dental problems. Anyways, that's it. Hope you guys go check out Brand of Sacrifice. Big horns up to Canadian metal, and we will see you in the next video. For glory, for the rebellion, Slammerella out.